Hello and welcome to the Hole in My Heart podcast. This is episode 136.
Hello and welcome. I am your host, Lori Krieg, and I am with my favorite licensed therapist, Jesus-like carpenter, Argyle expert. That's right, babe. It's back. Your adjective phrase is back because I just missed it. And my husband, Matt Krieg.
Hello.
Hey, Matt. And of course, we have the most professional, not only talented, but professional radio voice among us, producer Steve.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Steve. Guys, before we get rolling here, I did want to invite you to join our book launch team. It would mean so much to us if you joined our community of folks who are helping us to get the word out about an impossible marriage. If you go to impossiblemarriage.com, single and married people, I'm telling you, I think you'll be blessed. We believe you will be. The same person who endorsed our book endorsed our guest book today, and it's our friend and yours is that person is Greg Coles, but our new friend is going to talk to us about loneliness. That's right. This is something that nobody really wants to talk about or admit, but we all feel it. Let's courageously, which is our theme for this season of the podcast, let's talk about that which is uncomfortable. And let's do it with our new friend and author, Jason Gaboury. Jason, welcome.
Great to be with you today, Lori and Steve. Thank you for your ministry and the work that you're doing together. Just so grateful for you, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. For those of you who do not know Jason, he is a regional ministry director with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, an Anglican friar, and has contributed to a number of books, including Drama Team Handbook, and is the author of the new IVP. We love InterVarsity. IVP from audiobook, Wait With Me, Meeting God in Loneliness. I am so excited to dive into this, but before we do, let's ask you, our guest, and our audience a question about the theme today, which I did not get a ton of answers, and I think because it was a more vulnerable question instead of like, what's your mask story, which everyone wants to talk about that. Or doesn't want to talk about that, depending on who you talk to. However, here's the question of the week. When you're feeling lonely, what do you do that's helpful? Call someone, text someone, scroll, open the fridge, write a poem. I don't know. Probably your Enneagram type plays into this. But I would love to hear from you first, Jason, before we throw it to our audience.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a Gen Xer, so that means I like to talk on the phone.
Hey,
I remember when I was a teenager, we had one wired phone in the house, and it had like this 30-foot cord, so you could go around corners and up a set of stairs, but you'd still be physically wired to one place. So I know that makes me very old, but it's true.
So you call a friend. You phone a friend.
I phone a friend. Yeah, that's what I do.
And even that was kind of Gen X-y of me to throw in a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, wasn't it? I don't know.
It's a very good cultural reference there.
Yep.
Very relevant.
Poll the audience.
Is there one person that you usually call, or is it it just depends on whoever God puts in your mind or heart?
Yeah, it's kind of more the second. And I sort of have folks I try to call regularly, and then I have folks that are sort of in my list of just people I haven't talked to for a while, or just going to randomly call them. And I know it's so countercultural because we don't tend to do as much just calling today. Everybody texts and sets up time and schedules things. So I'm sort of that guy in the wider circle of friends' life who just randomly calls them on a Thursday to say hello.
I love
Tell me about your day.
I love that. There should be more of that. Okay, Matt Krieg, which audience response stood out to you?
Well, I really liked what Laura had to say on Facebook. She said she started leash training her cat during quarantine, and the cat is doing much better with fetch than she is with the leash, though. So I'm going to translate that as she finds something challenging to do, because that sounds nearly impossible, but I love it.
That's so great. And Matt, what do you do when you're lonely?
Oh, I would definitely be prone to escapism. So whether that's a book, whether that's scrolling through some sort of news feed or losing myself in sports content.
So that's your unhealthy or healthy?
That's my unhealthy.
What's a healthy one you do?
The healthy one would be either listening to music, specifically worship music, or reaching out and talking to someone, which I do very little of that. That's a work in progress.
Work in progress for you, yep. Steve Odell.
Yeah, I liked this response. it was another Laura on Facebook, and she said, "My typical responses are food and fiction, but I'm learning to reach out instead. Call, text, or even send an actual physical card." Um,
Mm.
yeah, I appreciated that. I relate to food and fiction um, in the unhealthy category, kind of like you're saying, Matt. I'll just put a movie on or something like that and then fill a bowl of chips, popcorn, whatever. But I actually have, because I know this about myself, just this last year, I've got this little to-do app on my phone, and I started putting in there, like it's just scheduled once a week, reach out to a friend. And
Wow.
usually it is a phone call because I'm also a Gen Xer. And it's been awkward because it's a little bit like, yeah, what do you want? I'm like, just to say hi. Like, guys don't do that. So sometimes I'll make something up like, oh yeah, I had a question about, do you have this kind of tool? Like I'm working on a
Oh,
thing. But a lot of times it is just, want to see how you're doing. And so anyway, it's,
that's
Steve, I'll give
great.
Steve, I'll give you my go-to line. My go-to line is, "You came to mind today," and
ooh,
I
that's
was just
good.
curious about what I was just curious to hear how you were.
Yes.
See that totally deflects it off of you,
Yeah. Came
and
to mind.
it makes
Ooh,
you seem like you're a really thoughtful person.
right.
You know.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
That's great. I appreciated this from Audrey on Facebook. I have a soft wood cross that fits in my palm, and I just hold on to it and talk to God and ask Him to hold me. Then I hug
Mm.
my dog. So, dogs, release those happy hormones when you pet them. And then I just liked that symbolism of holding a cross and just like that it can bring you back to centering place with God. Um,
Mm.
I like that. I try to talk to the Lord first and just tell Him about it. My work in progress is to posture my heart more and more daily toward Him, just to invite Him into this daily suffering. So it's like these little laments throughout the day. God's hard, or the joy. Thank you, God, for that. So
Mm.
that's my starting place. I'm someone who is a recovering codependent uh, relational person. And so for me to talk to people first often isn't the best thing. So to go to God
Yeah.
first and then to reach out to people, then they're just icing on the cake as opposed to
Yeah.
the whole meal.
Yeah. That's
Man,
great.
Jason, the reason we do this podcast is to talk about how the gospel is good news for everyone
Mm.
every day. And so we ask every guest this set of questions, which is, if the
Cool.
gospel is, I am more loved than I imagine and yet more sinful than I believe, when was that gospel first good news for you, and how is it still?
Yeah, I love that question, and I recognize the Keller influence there,
Yes.
and I love the way you've turned it to make it more positive. So fantastic, well done, team. My earliest memories are of church, and you'd be hard pressed to find someone more deeply churched than me. But because of some really dark and difficult circumstances growing up, I carried both a lot of shame for things that happened to me and to our family, and guilt for the ways that I'd hurt other people. And what this created for me was a deep lack of integrity, or perhaps even integration, in my understanding of the gospel. I didn't really know, I would say, what it meant to respond to God's love, grace, and truth by knowing, loving, and trusting Jesus, following Jesus, until my freshman year in college, when I met a man named Martin. And Martin was unique in that his life was full of God. I met Martin, saw him kind of across the room at an event, and I just thought, that guy knows God. I don't even know why I knew that, but that was sort of his presence had
Wow.
such a profound impact on me. I just knew he knew God, and it intrigued me, and I wanted to know how he could live so full and so free. And so I made an effort to get to know him. And as I shared about the dark and difficult parts of my past, about my resentment toward my dad, about the brokenness in our home, he caught me up short. He leaned in and he said, "Jason, God doesn't see us as we have been. He sees us as we are, and he sees what we can become in his love. And I had never understood the gospel in that way before.
Wow.
In that sentence, here was both a radical acceptance of all the wrongs done to me and all the wrongs I'd done, and kind of a acceptance that's the past. Also, radical acceptance of me as in my present. I didn't have to clean myself up or fix myself or do, he's radically present, and radical hope that connected to Jesus because of Jesus. Here was a life and a hope and a future that I could actively live into.
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, that I want that.
Hmm.
I want to know that. And so I'm still on that journey today. I think if you push me all the way down and say what's really, 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 really important to you, Jason, it's I want to know God. I want to know God. I want to know God deeply, freely, fully, and I want to pass on the fruit of knowing God to other people. And so that relationship that led me to life with God still has deep meaning for me.
Is there a way that that kind of radical presence, that radical hopefulness that you talk about, has been kind of more manifesting itself for you lately?
Yeah, what a great question. Um, this morning, I talked to a friend I hadn't talked to in a long time, and this is one of those friends that, for whatever reason, I have this desire to try to make myself look good in front of. I don't know if you ever struggle to like want to make yourself look good in front of people, but
Yeah.
here I am. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and I've got this time to talk to my friend, and as I'm experiencing in real time the temptation to like make myself look good, there is this calm, present voice that says, "You are seen, known, and loved. You don't have to impress him. You don't have to be impressive. Just look around you. Just be present to me. Just be present to my love, and let me be the fuel
Hmm.
that helps you to be present in this relationship." This person's not a believer, um, but still in that I can lean into the presence of God to be the fuel that helps me connect with this friend. And that perspective shift was just, it was liberating. So yeah, I need that every day. Um, and that's just one example.
Mm. So good. So loneliness. Why the
Mm.
passion for it?
Oh man. Well, most people are lonely. Here's the I, I I was really struggling with this question, Lori, just to be honest, because I could tell you my personal connections to loneliness and how I grew up feeling lonely and disconnected. But I think that's only half the passion. I think it's true that I grew up feeling lonely, but I think that the other side of the passion is most of us are lonely and we don't know it. And we don't know how to talk about it.
Hmm.
And what's worse is that most people who are lonely assume that loneliness means that there's something wrong with them, that they're low status, that they're undesirable, that they're not seen, known, loved, or valued. And that is itself is a tragedy. I don't know if you know, but Cigna, which is an insurance company, just released a study, it's pre-COVID-19 study. And in the study, was revealed that almost 8 out of 10 young people, Generation Z, report regularly feeling lonely.
Hmm.
Um, Millennials it's between 6 and 7 out of 10. And it actually goes down from there, with it backstopping sort of with the builder generation sort of around 50%. But if you think about that generationally, we've got a crisis of loneliness. Like, even if it was just half the population that was feeling lonely regularly, you'd have a problem. But with young people being 8 out of 10, that's huge.
Mm.
And so I'm passionate about the topic because it's a ubiquitous problem, and we have to learn to talk about it, and we have to find a way through it. And as you know, and loneliness unchecked increases the risk of heart disease, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, ability to regulate emotion. The list goes on and on and on. And one study points to the health risks of loneliness being equivalent to smoking about 3/4 of a pack of cigarettes a day. And so this is a major problem. And what most people don't know is that the Christian tradition, that the Bible itself has powerful tools that can lead people through loneliness into deep connection with God, in deep connection with themselves, and deeper compassion for other people. And so I'm passionate about the need because it's a real need that we need to learn how to talk about. And I'm passionate about the opportunity. And I'm passionate because personally, I've seen how God has transformed me and is transforming me in the process.
Mm.
So there's lots of passion here.
Yeah. I just want to throw a couple more statistics, and then Matt, I know you have a question, but I just was looking at CDC report that came out 6 days ago. Maybe you saw this, but 18 to 24-year-olds in the last 30 days have 25% have seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days. 1 out of 4. And then 63% have reported an anxiety or depressive disorder. So post-COVID, we're struggling. I'm sure those relate to that, the pandemic of loneliness.
Yeah. It's getting worse. For sure.
And speaking of the pandemic, I mean, now we are in this kind of new reality that we're living in the past 6 months that, we're isolated from one another. How have you seen kind of loneliness and interacted with loneliness differently since the pandemic has kind of really set into the States?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, the pandemic made it easier to talk about. And I was actually grateful for it because loneliness is so hard to talk about and that most of us avoid it. But, and then in some ways, in other ways, um, uh, I, I used the pandemic to get to loneliness and to the problems with loneliness, because I think a lot of the problems that we have, actually, loneliness is a major contributing factor, right? So the number one researcher on loneliness and human connection, John Cappadocio, he says, Campiscio, I can't never pronounce his last name well, but he says loneliness never travels alone. It's connected with anxiety, it's connected with depression, it's connected with can be connected with rage and other types of problems. And so you have any number of crises. Loneliness could be either the cause or partial cause, or a major contributing complexifying factor that if you're not talking about, it's really hard. So any of the challenges that we're talking about in our culture now, whether it's our challenge with the pandemic, where obviously we are disconnected from each other, we're not touching each other, right? And human beings actually need to touch each other to help us regulate our cortisol levels. Like, this is just a physical reality. We need to be touched. We need to be in relationships. And yet in this time, because of the disease, physical touch and relationships are much harder. We got to talk about loneliness. Or you look at the racial reckoning that's happening. And I don't want to suggest for a minute that loneliness is at the bottom of it, because there's lots of complex factors, but loneliness is a contributor. It makes it much more difficult. When when the protests started up again, and this latest wave of kind of racial protests started up again, the constant refrain I heard over and over again from my friends of color were, "I need you to see me. I don't need, I need you to see me." And this is often the voice of a group, a marginalized group, who's trying to bring their concerns, and they're saying, "I need you to see me." Well, what's underneath that? I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. I don't feel known. I don't feel valued. Loneliness is all the way down, and that's part of what makes it so difficult to talk about. So I appreciate the fact that this pandemic is giving us a practical reason to talk about this, because it's more on the mind, and I think that's actually healthy.
Yeah, we need to get it up and out. So, in your book, you talk about this concept of grasping. What is grasping and how does it relate to loneliness?
Yeah. Well, so Americans, I'm a New Yorker. I live in New York. I'm not in New York right now, but I'm a New Yorker, and there's just something about New Yorkers and Americans. We, the kind of American go-getter, right? Like let's go after my life. Let's grab after whatever you're looking for and grasp after it. Ambition is prized and valued, and the problem, of course, is that we value success and achievement over connection,
Mm,
and that actually undermines our ability to thrive.
yeah.
And so, in the book, I have a chapter that's all it explores the biblical character of Jacob, whose name actually literally means grabber. And if you look at the story of Jacob's life, what you find is somebody whose desire to grasp after the things that he was promised anyway, and to try to secure for himself uh, success and security and the things that in which he think are going to give him the life that he desires. They actually poison every relationship in his life. They poison his relationship with his father and mother. They poison the relationship with his brother. They poison the relationship with his children. Um, and so you have here's this person whose grasping tendencies actually undermine relationship. And in the book, what I'm trying to help us to see is this idea that the one being that Jacob needs to grasp onto is this mysterious stranger that comes to him in his moments of greatest need, who is committed to him despite the fact that he's a scoundrel.
Hmm.
you know, and it's grasping onto and wrestling with that presence that actually is transformative for Jacob and can be transformative for us as well.
Hmm.
Can you also talk a little bit? There's a chapter in your book called "Listen."
Mm.
Can you speak a little bit into that, and specifically just the interaction with your daughter?
Yes. Yeah, restlessness is that's the chapter on where I talk about restlessness, and most of us are restless for more of
Mm-hmm.
everything. We like experience, we like life, and we have this inner restlessness with us. And I remember coming into my daughter's room when she was crying. She's having a spiritual crisis when she was about 4 years old, and she's shaking. And I came into her room and I said, "Honey, what's the matter? Do you have a bad dream?" She said, "No." She said, I want to see Jesus. She's just crying, and she's praying. She's like, I prayed and I asked Jesus to come in my room, but he's not here.
Yeah.
She's just this heart, and you just this desire for I want to connect with God. I want to play with Jesus. That's her frame. She's 4, right?
Yep.
And why can't I see it? Why can't I have it? Why can't I have it now? Why can't I do this? That's our inner restlessness. When we grow up, we maybe don't ugly cry in the same way, but you know, we we do the same thing. I want my book to be published now. Why can't I see it? I want I want to be on another podcast. Like all that kind of stuff. And it's just this restlessness. And of course the the strength, the gift from scripture and from the Christian tradition is learning to listen. What's underneath that restlessness? If you can listen to it and you can pay attention to it, there's something underneath it, and that whatever that is underneath will give you a clue as to what God has already put His finger on. What is meaningful, important to you that feels threatened and feels vulnerable. And if we can start to be honest, we can start to pay attention to that, start to be honest with that, then we can listen to our lives, listen to our desires, listen to the things that are driving us.
Hmm.
then we can bring that to God. There's this idea in worship, in some kind of popular worship, like leave your problems over there and then come and worship Jesus. And I want to say, I think that's entirely wrongheaded. I want to say, understand what all of your problems are, what all of your drives are, what all of your needs are, and all that they say about you, and then bring all of that to Jesus. And what you will find is somebody who is radically present to you in the midst of all of that restlessness,
Mm.
and one who can give you the ability to listen and learn from your life, learn from those restless desires, those restless moments. So
It's
yeah,
beautiful. I hear in that, like, I'm just remembering what Matt said in his best lonely moments. He goes to worship. I'm remembering what you said in
mm,
the practical response to, the gospel is when you notice you were grasping toward your friend this morning on that phone call, the
hmm
Lord just
hmm
spoke in there. So, and then as I'm thinking about how, today and this week, this has been a hard few days for me, and just reaching to God, just trying to change my heart posture. God, this is hard. And so for me, it's like micro laments, like just getting real with Him
hmm
throughout the day. So how does that interact? Like how does lamenting? You don't exactly talk. At least maybe I missed it, but about lamenting directly. But it's in there
hmm
about just
yeah,
taking your real heart to God and how He enters in to that space. Do you know what I'm talking about? How
yeah,
does that
I
interact in your
do.
life?
Yeah. Well, I think about lament and grief as connected. There's multiple kinds of grief. There's the grief where you yell and you rant, like that's a lament, and then there's the lament that you mourn and you cry. But they're both driven by something isn't right. There isn't some. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. And the powerful thing that is available to us in learning to lament and to grieve is to discover the God who laments and grieves. I was really profoundly moved. I tell a story in the book about some of the chaos and disruption of our life growing up. I tell a story in the book about that, and I talk about how painful and scary and challenging it was for us. And then, as I was writing the book, years after having talked, worked through this with spiritual direction and counseling, and thinking I've got this, I got this managed. I'm I'm having again rehearsing this experience of imagining Jesus present in the midst of the grief and the this isn't supposed to happen like this, and the lament, and I experience, in that prayer moment I experience Jesus's compassion for me, but then I also, that gave me fuel to then have compassion for the other people. And
Yes.
so, and it's this like this strange connection where my heart and Jesus's heart are coming together in this incredible way, and I
Mm.
can feel Jesus's compassion, and then I can share compassion for other people, which I don't have the ability in my own. When I'm consumed by my own lament and grief, I can't do that. Now that's at the end of a process in which you meet the God who laments, the God who is willing to go into the vulnerable, difficult, angry, and sad places around death.
Mm.
When Jesus says, um, you know, when Jesus cries in the Gospel of John, Jesus wept, before his friend Lazarus. He cries, and it's this phrase that's used. It's like basically Jesus ugly cries. It's this really really emotive kind of gut wrenching cry. But then the next thing that Jesus does in that scene is it says Jesus cries out in a loud voice, and I like to think of Jesus screaming at death because he hates it so much. And
Mm.
this isn't the way. So I think, what does it look like when Jesus laments? I think of Jesus standing at the tomb of his friend, yelling at him to come out of the grave.
Mm.
And I don't think this is, I don't I because I don't think that is just a command. I think it carries with it the all of the, this isn't the way this is supposed to be. This isn't the way this is, and this it just the the emotional connectedness or connected tissue there is very strong, I think, for me.
Huge. Oh, it's so good. That for me was a huge what that process you described, which again is kind of the tail end, lots of processing you need.
Right.
But of me working through sexual assault that I experienced as a kid was understanding the grief of God. But what you just said, that description, the Lazarus, etc., the rage, the holy righteous rage toward death and sin. Someone needed to hear that just now and needs to click this off and go and do that right now with Jesus. And he's gonna meet you. He will meet you. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I mean, okay. Just want to kind of jump in a little bit because, yeah, Laura, you're describing a place in your life where you had forgiveness work that you needed to do, and God met you there, but it was a process, and I don't want people to confuse like this going to Jesus and this grief and this expression of all the pain and all of the rage and all of the anguish as something that is akin to, hey, forgive and forget. And so like I think one of the important things about what you're talking about, Jesus meeting you and yes, you getting his heart even for the compassion that you had on other people is it wasn't through a dismissal of what you were going through. It was through probably greater recognition of the pain and the anguish and everything, and then for God to kind of give you his heart. And so
That's good, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good word.
Absolutely. And no one can tell another, telling somebody to forgive and forget is it's not very helpful advice. It's not very helpful. It yeah it and it the idea that the fact that Jesus can transform our hearts towards people who have hurt us deeply, um, through a process of experiencing grief and lament and raging and grief and all of that, um, is, I think, the end of a process that can take a long time. And Jesus doesn't skip to the end. He's not that kind. God isn't that kind of God, radically present to you and radically present right here, right now, in the midst of this. And then who you can be, who you can become in the love of God. If you let God love you, if you receive God's love time and over time, there's transformation. But God isn't skipping to the end. He's present with you through the whole thing, which I think is really important.
And is really the antidote to this loneliness thing is in the process. He's there.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, there's a group of people that have had their lives just drastically altered, and I would think specifically about ministry leaders. Pastors especially. They say that leadership is lonely by itself, but now you don't have the stage, you don't have the face-to-face interactions that you're used to, and it can be just all the more isolating. Is there anything you would say to ministry leaders kind of in this time of loneliness?
Yeah, I'd say three things to them. One is you have to deal with your own loneliness. And if you've dealt with your own loneliness, you need to deal with it again. So many people go into ministry because they're looking for community, because they're lonely, because they're looking for connections and community. And gosh, if they're not aware of that, if you're in ministry and you're not aware of that, and you haven't ruthlessly examined that as a possible kind of shadow side to your leadership, you need to do that, because if you don't, the likelihood of you being sucked in and your community being sucked into the undertow of your own unmet needs is so high and so bad for everybody that you need to do that. So you need to deal with your own loneliness, and to come to the ability to say, am I loved, seen, known, loved, and valued if I'm not on a platform every week? Am I seen, known, loved, and valued if I can't make that hospital call and bring that word of encouragement? Am I still valuable? That's heart work that pastors need to do. They need to do them for themselves. So, second thing I would say is you have a discipleship responsibility to teach your people to pastor your people and teach your people, disciple your people around loneliness, because it's pandemic. And I know it's hard to talk about. You ask somebody, how's your day? Nobody responds with, oh, I'm actually feeling quite lonely today, and what, but you've got to be able to create safe spaces where you can disciple people deeply and help them to engage with God in this vulnerable place. And then thirdly, I think there's a theological task for people in ministry right now. Loneliness is it's the only problem that human beings experience before the fall.
Huh.
I don't get into this that much in the book, but it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good all through Genesis 1. Then Genesis 2, it's not good that the human being should be alone, right? All of a sudden you have this is not good. So that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of I need to connect with other people for it to be right, that's not a result of the fall, that's not a result of sin. And the fact that and the fact that we feel shame about needing other people is actually it's because we're formed as Western individualists, not biblical Christians. Biblical Christians should feel no more shame of feeling lonely than they do of their need for food and sleep, because it's just baked in all the way down. We need so, but pastors have got to do the theological work to help people understand there's nothing wrong with you. If you're lonely, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because you're human. You're made in the image of God. You're made for relationship, and that loneliness that you feel just as a connection to your humanity in God's image, and we need to anchor people there over and over and over again, because, and I know it's not popular, and I know it's hard to talk about, but the need is so great. We've got to be able to do it.
And if pastors could do it from a vulnerable position, shame-free, like that, I'm excited to talk about that, Lord willing, next week with Kurt Thompson, how we can eliminate shame now. But if they can just say, hey, this is what I'm wrestling with, that would liberate a lot of people. And even in reading your book, like, it was very refreshing to have a dude just say, this is what I've wrestled with since maybe conception, but like birth, And I thought, you were in the NICU or something for the first 6 weeks. And so was Matt. And then I was like, oh man, maybe this is why Matt is this way. And then I started going down a bad wife trail. That was not great. So I stopped. But throughout your book, in addition to laying out some really gripping pieces of your story that were very relatable, you do throw some help. I don't want to say helpful hints, because that makes your book seem like it's self-help. It's not. But you do offer some practical tools in the midst. You weave it through story. It's very beautiful. Go buy it, guys. Wait with me. Jason Gaboury. But can you help the person listening right now? And maybe when you were saying the statistics, I was saying the statistics, they're raising their hand. They're like, I'm wrestling with suicidal ideation. I've got anxiety, depression, in addition to this loneliness pandemic that's raging through my soul. Can you speak to them right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. This is what I would want to say to you if you're struggling with loneliness right now. What you need to know is that there isn't anything wrong with you. You're not lonely because you're undesirable. You're not lonely because of your ethnic story or your sexual orientation, or because you're less talented or lower status than the people around you. You are lonely. You're experiencing loneliness because you're human, because you're made in the image of God. And the ache of loneliness that you feel is an opportunity for you to know God in a whole new way, for you to know yourself in a whole new way, and for you to grow compassion for others and the ability to connect with others in a whole new way. And so a couple of really practical things for you. I actually have written a one pager. It's 6 spiritual disciplines for seasons of loneliness. You can get it on my website, www.jasongaboury.com. It's called Spiritual Disciplines for Seasons of Loneliness. And it will walk you through things like learning to sit still and pay attention when you are feeling loneliness, how to engage your creativity, when you're feeling loneliness, how to meditate on scripture when you're experiencing seasons of loneliness, how to grieve, how to let, a lot of times when we're feeling lonely, we're also feeling sad because loneliness doesn't tend to travel alone. How to grieve. And so really practical things. You can get that. It's on the blog of jasongaboury.com, and you can pick that up. If you subscribe, you can get a free first chapter of the book, and that could also help start you on a journey towards deeper connection with yourself, with God, and with others. But the main thing to take away, so those things can help you if you're listening and you're struggling with loneliness. But the main thing you need to know is that there isn't something wrong with you. You are seen, known, loved, and valued as you are today, right now. And God sees a future for you if you will let him love you.
So good. So good. Man, Jason, I really like you. Thank you for being on this podcast today.
I'm so glad to be here with you. It's great. Great fun.
All right, we will wrap it up on our end, Jason, so we can let you go and be respectful of your time.
Sure.
Thanks for bearing with our sunshine eyeballs, and for sharing your heart. It's a gift to right now, but also for all of eternity and time, as you beautifully pointed out.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, many blessings on your work. I love what you guys are doing, and next time you see Greg, please greet him for me.
I will do that. I'll probably text him tonight. All right.
Awesome.
See you, Jason.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Okay, friends, go. Get it. Get Wait with Me. Meeting God in Loneliness, wherever you find your books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I don't know. Probably IVP. Go there, intervarsitypress.com. But while you're clicking around, if you guys like this podcast, thank you. We like doing it, and we like you. But we would so appreciate if you took a moment to rate and review the podcast. It helps others to find this content. So thank you so much. We do have a question of the week for next week. I mentioned, again, Lord willing, because usually when I'm like, oh, definitely, we're having this guest for sure, and then they're like, can't show up or something. But we're talking to Curt Thompson, who wrote The Soul of Shame, and I have a question for you guys, which will actually be in 2 weeks. So I mentioned Curt Thompson coming. Lord willing, he's coming in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to have a special guest. We will talk about it next week when you're here. But our question of the week for 2 weeks when Curt Thompson is here talking about shame is this: how would you walk into a room differently if you knew you were deeply loved by God? If you really knew it down to your toes, how would you walk into a room differently? This question has been wrecking me. I threw it out to a couple people I've discipled recently, and I just keep thinking about it, and it is changing the way I walk into a room and walk out of rooms if I start wrestling with shame. So can't wait to talk to Curt Thompson. If you want to answer that, follow me on the old Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Just look up Laurie Krieg, LaurieKrieg. But guys, thanks again to Jason Gaboury. I think Matt was checking out his website to be able to give those 6 things to do in loneliness. Were you, honey?
I started to, and then I was like, I'll just be present for a second and get it after it's done.
Oh, but I am sure that would be great for your clients, but for me as well, for everyone. But guys, for us here at the Hole in My Heart podcast, we're so excited to see you next week.